Hi, I chose to do my human rights report card on Iran. So, Iran is located in the Middle East and is neighbors with Iraq, Afghanistan, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, and Pakistan. After conducting thorough research on the nation, I have decided to give Iran a D in its human rights record, and I will explain why. So, in order to understand the current political climate in Iran, you first need to understand brief historical background. For a while in the mid 1900s, under the rule of the Pahlavi dynasty led by the Shah, Iran was secular and under Western influence. However, many opposed this modernization and wanted Iran to return to its Sharia, or religious law, therefore, the Shah was overthrown. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution, or the Islamic Revolution, resulted in the toppling of the previous monarchy and led to an establishment of an official Islamic republic led by Ayatollah Khomeini. He believed that the government should be supervised by the clergy, and the supreme leader, which was himself, would have absolute power. And as a result, years of progressive thinking were completely pushed back, and Iran returned to being a conservative Muslim nation. So, the first human rights issue that I wanted to address was the treatment of women. Women in Iran suffer a system of discrimination and inequality. Based on the system, the life of a woman is half as valuable as that of a man, and women are treated as second-class citizens. The court considers men as heads of the household with legal authority over their wives, and in addition, women and girls in Iran are extremely vulnerable to violence and harassment. Every year, 400 to 500 women are killed brutally in Iran to protect men's honor. These honor killings are usually executed by close relatives, often the victim's father, husband, or brother. Honor killings punish women for bringing disgrace upon their families, for example, by refusing forced marriages, being victims of rape, getting divorced, or engaging in adultery. And although honor killings are not a new phenomenon, they have been increasing in recent years. Many Iranian women are expecting to face new difficulties under the recent administration, and this will only intensify hostilities between women's rights activists and the government. Although Iran has a pretty progressive stance on women holding places of power in government and women receiving education, Iran still has tremendous work to do regarding women's rights. The next human rights issue I wanted to address is the policy on executions and capital punishment. Iran continues to be one of the world's leading implementers of the death penalty and executes more people per capita than any other country. The rate of executions has increased alarmingly, 26% from 2021, and around half of them were from drug-related offenses. Iranian law also considers acts such as insulting the Prophet, same-sex relations, adultery, and drinking alcohol as crimes punishable by death. Just at the start of 2022 alone, Iran had already executed 49 people for minimal crimes. The victim is usually publicly hanged from a construction crane or stoned to death. In line with international pressure, Iran should move to abolish the use of the death penalty in all cases that do not meet the standards of the most serious crime. Even though there are still many improvements to be made to Iran's justice system, abolishing the death penalty will be a substantial step towards progress. Lastly, Iran's law enforcement continues to implement ruthless force, mass arrests, and torture to crush peaceful protesters and human rights activists. In August 2021, Iranian authorities arrested 6 prominent human rights lawyers and activists for filing a complaint against the Iranian authorities for mismanagement of the COVID crisis. Later in September that year, human rights defender Narges Mohammadi announced that she was summoned a 30-month prison sentence for charges including signing a letter opposing the death penalty, staging a sit-in at a prison office, and property damage. During a crackdown of protesters in November 2019, one prominent activist was fatally shot, and since then, Iranian authorities have failed to conduct any investigation into the use of excessive and unlawful force against protesters. On to current news. One instance of Iran's disregard of freedom of speech was the arrest of Hossein Ronagi in February 2022. Ronagi is an advocate for human rights and internet freedom. He has spent several years in prison for his peaceful activities. He reportedly criticized the bill for the protection of the rights of cyberspace users, which would drastically increase the ability for Iranian authorities to censor and surveil activity on the internet. Although he may be a controversial figure to the Iranian government, to citizens, Hussein is considered a hero who has worked hard for the freedom of the internet and has been the voice of the people fighting for democracy, human rights, and a free Iran. Lastly, I wanted to share these images. These are both images of protests. The first one is Iranians protesting the executions and capital punishment, but unfortunately, these protests were met with violence despite how peaceful they were. And the second one is a protest to stop the sanctions on Iran. During the peak of the COVID crisis, the US raised economic sanctions to prevent Iran from receiving proper medical aid, vaccines, and this ended up exacerbating the country's spread in COVID cases. So many citizens went to the street to protest these sanctions until they were later lifted. So, for all these reasons, I've decided to give Iran a D in human rights. Thank you.